Petra was a city in the desert, in Jordan. It was carved into red cliffs. It shouldn't have survived. It was a capital, and it wasn't magic that made it work. It was water. They mastered water. They turned a wasteland into an oasis. They got wealthy from it. They had thousands of people living there. They had to deal with flash floods. They commanded them, they used them, and they built hidden systems. Those systems made the city hard to attack. It was nearly impregnable. The answers are a kind of blueprint. For resilience, it feels relevant now. That idea of harmony with the environment, what does that really mean for a civilization? The land around Petra is extreme. It's all red rock, baked under a sky that's almost always clear blue. Rain is rare, and when it comes, it's usually violent, just a few inches a year. And the ground is cut through with canyons, steep cliffs, a real maze. In a place like that, finding one reliable water source would seem impossible. A miracle, but that's exactly where the Nabateans built their capital. Not just a town, but a major city. It feels like a choice that makes no sense. Why build there in such a hostile place? The logic was different. It was about security, control. That landscape was a natural fortress. The entrance was a narrow, winding canyon, a perfect choke point for any army. The dryness that threatened life also protected it, but that advantage came with a huge cost. A city can't survive on defense alone. To thrive, to become the center of the incense trade, Petra needed to support tens of thousands of people. It needed gardens, public baths, fountains. It needed water for all those camels, all those merchants, and there was no great river here, no Nile, no Euphrates. That's the starting paradox. How do you build a wealthy hub in a place that seems to refuse it? The Nabateans knew that in this desert, water wasn't just a resource. It was the foundation of everything. Their survival, their power, their identity, it all came down to one question. How do you command the desert? The answer wasn't to fight the landscape. It was to listen to it. Their engineering was so intuitive, it was almost an art. The desert around Petra, its water is held in the sky, not in the ground. For most of the year, those wadis, the deep canyons, they're just dry riverbeds, dusty. But then a rainstorm comes over the highlands and everything changes. The rock is baked hard by the sun, so it can't absorb the water. The water just sheets off the stone. It gathers speed and volume, funneling into those narrow channels. A peaceful canyon becomes a roaring wall of water, a flash flood. It can scour away anything in its path. For an ordinary settlement, that's a recurring nightmare. Pure destruction, but the Nabateans, they saw something else. They looked at that torrent and saw their salvation. That was their first engineering principle. Maybe their greatest. They decided to make the flash flood work for them. It started with observation, a deep reading of the land. They didn't just see a single canyon flooding. They understood the whole watershed. The high plateau around Petra acted like a giant catchment bowl, rocky. When rain fell miles away, they knew which wadis would channel that water. They knew how fast it would arrive. They became masters of predicting it, the desert's sudden, violent generosity, and with that knowledge they set out to command it. They didn't try to stop the flood. They engineered the landscape to capture it, to slow it down, to persuade it to go where they needed. They built low stone walls across smaller tributaries and slopes. These weren't dams to hold back the main force. They were like speed bumps for water. They'd spread the flow out, let sediment drop, slow the torrent's momentum before it ever reached the city. Further down, they carved channels into the canyon walls, diversion barriers. Think of them as traffic directors. For a liquid stampede, they'd guide a portion of the raging water away from the main channel. Into holding tanks or into slower, managed aqueducts. They were taming the flood not with brute strength but with redirection. In one stroke, they solved two problems. They neutralized the destructive threat, and they secured their entire water supply. The catastrophic event became a scheduled delivery. The most violent force in their environment became their most vital resource. That reframing is what set them apart. It wasn't just about building things, it was a mindset, a proactive partnership with a harsh world. They listened to the desert's rhythms, understood its language of sudden violence, and they answered with a design, an elegant, life-sustaining design. The most dramatic example of this is right at the city's main gate. The entrance to Petra is through a place called the Sick. It's a natural crack in the cliff over a kilometer long. The walls go up hundreds of feet, but the path is only a few meters wide. Walking through it now, you feel that sense of awe. But for the Nabateans, the Sick wasn't just a grand entrance. It was their biggest weakness and their biggest chance to build something. Because the Sick is a trap, it's the lowest point in the whole area, the natural drain for the Wadi Musa Canyon. When a storm came, this beautiful corridor would turn into a raging river. Any army at its mouth would be washed away, but the city would be destroyed too. The very thing that made Petra defensible also made it deadly, so the Nabateans did a kind of magic trick. They turned the threat into the answer. Right where the wider canyon narrows into the Sick, they built a huge diversion dam. This was a massive stone wall meant to take the full force of a flash flood. Its job was simple. It didn't try to stop all the water. Instead, it worked like a traffic cop. It lifted the floodwaters up and sent them away from the Sick entrance through a man-made tunnel in the northern cliff. That tunnel dumped the destructive water into another valley away from Petra. But then there was the water the city actually needed. That's where the real genius is. The dam wasn't just a barrier, it was also an intake. A part of the floodwater was allowed into the Sick, but in a controlled way. They carved a narrow channel into the southern wall. For most of the length, this channel is hidden. It runs underground beneath the paving stones, or it's tucked into the rock. If you didn't know to look for the outlets, you'd never see it. This hidden channel was built with perfect precision. Archaeologists point out the gradient is very consistent. It falls only about 1 meter for every 100 meters of length. A slope of just 1%, that wasn't an accident. That precise angle did two things. It gave a steady, manageable flow of water into the city center for reservoirs and fountains. And just as important, it made the flow too slow to erode the stone. The water moved with purpose but without violence, so the Sick, this natural wonder, became a dual system. On the surface, it was a dry, impressive road for merchants and diplomats, safe and secure, but running silently beside them, sometimes right under their feet, was the city's lifeblood. They took the desert's most violent force and convinced it to walk quietly into their homes. That was planning on a grand scale. It turned their greatest danger into their most reliable source of life. But catching the water was only the first step. The real test was what they did with it once it was there. Capturing that torrent was only the first part. The desert gives its water all at once in a chaotic burst. The real challenge was making that generosity last, turning a moment of abundance into months of security. Their diversion channels were a masterpiece of redirection, but their storage systems were about foresight. The Nabateans didn't just move water, they convinced it to stay. They looked at the rock that defined their city. They saw cliffs to carve homes into, and they saw giant, natural tanks waiting to be formed. Their engineers learned to read the sandstone. They found natural fissures, pockets in the bedrock where water could be pooled, and then they began to carve with immense patience. They hollowed out vast underground chambers. Some were big enough to hold water for an entire neighborhood. These weren't just holes, they were carefully shaped cisterns lined with plaster, designed to maximize capacity and minimize evaporation. This storage network was layered. At the top were the massive public reservoirs, fed directly by the floodwaters from the Sick. These were the city's strategic reserve. Then the system branched out. It became beautifully decentralized. Individual homes, even modest ones, often had their own small cistern, carved right beneath the courtyard. They would collect rainwater from rooftops or get an allocation from the public channels. Every household had a personal buffer against shortage. It created a culture of water independence. Woven into daily life, the magic was in the lining. Sandstone is porous. Leave water in an unlined tank, and it seeps away into the ground, so they developed a waterproof cement. A hydraulic plaster from local materials. They mixed crushed pottery shards, lime, and sand. It created a seamless, impermeable coating. That plaster turned a porous rock bowl into a perfect vessel. Think about the rhythm of life in Petra. After the autumn rains, the engineers would guide the flash floods. The public reservoirs would fill. The household cisterns would top up. And then, as the sky turned relentlessly blue for months, that stored water became the city's lifeblood. It fed the gardens that grew fruits in the desert. It supplied the public fountains and baths. It meant a merchant caravan arriving in the deep dryness of summer could still water its animals. People could still bathe. The city could function as if the rains had just fallen. This was saving for a non-rainy day, elevated to an art form. It wasn't hoarding. It was intelligent resource management on a civic scale. The water network created resilience. It gave Petra the ability to withstand not just weeks, but potentially years of lower rainfall. It turned the city's greatest vulnerability, its arid environment, into a managed system. The desert's infrequent gift was stretched thin across the calendar, sustaining life long after the last cloud had passed, but storing water so effectively created a new puzzle. How do you move this precious, still resource to exactly where it's needed across a city of cliffs and canyons without wasting a single drop? The sound of water was the city's heart. Not a flood, but a constant murmur, a background hum. This was the final stage of their engineering, a network of terracotta pipes, stone-lined channels. They branched out from the main arteries in the Sick like capillaries. These smaller conduits carried the managed flow into the city's fabric, into public squares, into neighborhood cisterns, into the homes of the wealthy. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about comfort, about civilization. Water became a social currency. Its reliable presence meant public health. Baths and latrines fed by the system reduced illness in a crowded space. For a trading society, cleanliness had practical importance. Ritual importance, but more visibly, water became a display, a show of control and prosperity. The most striking symbol is the Nymphaeum. Archaeologists believe a grand public fountain stood in the city center. A monument not to a king, but to water itself. Imagine it, in the middle of a desert city, a sculpted facade. Carvings, fresh, cool water cascading continuously into a basin. The sound alone was a statement, a declaration that here, abundance was not a hope, it was a fact engineered into existence. This urban plumbing did something profound. It transformed Petra's identity. The city was no longer just a defensible stronghold. It became a comfortable, sophisticated metropolis. Water was integrated into daily life. Into urban aesthetics, elite homes had private baths, small garden courtyards fed by their own pipes. The public gathered at fountains, not just to collect water, but to socialize. In a space defined by coolness and sound, the psychological impact is hard to overstate. In an environment of scarcity, they created pockets of palpable plenty. This visible, flowing water was the ultimate proof of mastery. It showed their pact with the desert was not just functional, it was beautiful, and it raised a question. Any visitor, any rival would have asked it, with all this wealth and water on display, how did they keep it safe? The answer lies not just in the narrow canyon entrance. It lies in the water system itself, designed as a hidden line of defense. The fountains were a marvel, but that wasn't the end of it. Beyond the streets and the buildings, there was a more basic problem. Feeding thousands of people, a desert city can't just live on trade, it needs food, so they turned their engineering outward to the slopes around Petra. What we see now as empty hillsides, those were something else, a managed agricultural landscape. They used runoff farming. It sounds simple, but it changed things. They built low stone walls across those slopes, following the land's shape. These weren't dams, they were terraces, and their job was gentle, to slow the little rain that fell. To keep the soil from washing away in a storm, to let that water sink into the ground right there. Each terrace made a small, level pocket, a tiny catchment. Over time, these pockets caught water and silt and organic matter. They became little fields, fertile spots in the stone. This was farming by persuasion. They weren't trying to water the whole desert. They were making precise places for things to grow, but the terraces were just one piece. The Nabateans connected it all. They channeled extra water from the city's main reservoirs and cisterns. The water that had already been used in homes and baths, it wasn't wasted. It went through secondary canals to walled gardens and orchards outside the city. So picture it, olive trees, grapevines drawing from that managed supply, grains growing in those terraced pockets. It was a closed loop. The flash flood was caught in the sick. Stored in the city, used for civic life, for homes, and then what was left went out to feed the fields that fed the people. This agricultural ring did more than provide food. It changed the land. The vegetation helped stabilize the soil, stopped erosion. The gardens made pockets of cooler, more humid air, a modified microclimate. They were greening the edges of their world, and that turns the whole idea upside down. Petra wasn't just an isolated jewel in a wasteland. It was the center of a productive, human-shaped ecosystem. The water that carved the city also grew its food. Every drop had a purpose, a journey, from the storm cloud to the cliff, through the channel, into the home, and finally to the root of a vine. That holistic view, it makes you wonder about the people who built it. What kind of society comes from that kind of delicate, interdependent relationship with a harsh place? That constant water was their secret. The fountains and baths were a show of strength, but the real source of Petra's power, the reason it could be an independent fortress, was kept out of sight. That's the third principle, secrecy as defense. Their water network wasn't just a utility, it was a hidden asset. The main channel in the Sick was an open secret. But the broader system was a guarded map. Archaeologists find the important cisterns in obscure places, high on cliff faces reached by hidden paths, or tucked into side canyons, openings disguised by rock falls. These weren't the public reservoirs, these were the emergency reserves, the city's savings account kept in a vault no outsider could find. The logic was simple for a desert kingdom. Petra's wealth made it a target. Any rival army would see those cliffs as a challenge, but they'd also see a weakness, no visible water source. An attacker's plan would rely on a siege, surround the city, cut off supplies, and wait for thirst to do the work, but in Petra that was doomed. Because the city's water didn't come from a single spring outside the walls. It was stored in hundreds of hidden tanks inside the fortress itself. The lifeblood was woven into the very rock. An invading force camped in the valleys below would be baking in the sun, rationing the water they brought. Meanwhile, inside the city, life could continue almost normally. Gardens could be watered from concealed cisterns. People could still drink. The siege clock, which counted down to surrender elsewhere, didn't apply here. This secrecy turned their engineering into a geopolitical weapon. It granted them autonomy. They could negotiate from unshakable strength because they held the one resource no besieger could take: time. They could outlast any opponent. The psychological impact would have been profound. to watch week after week as smoke still rose from the city, as signs of life continued, while your own men suffered in the heat. It would have seemed like magic or a cruel trick, so the narrow entrance of the sick was only the first layer. The second, more subtle layer was the network of channels and tanks that made the city self-sufficient. The walls kept enemies out, but the hidden water kept the people alive, patient, and in control. Petra's security wasn't just about keeping threats away. It was about ensuring the city's own endurance, regardless of what happened beyond its cliffs. This shows a sophisticated understanding of power. True security isn't just about strong gates. It's about controlling the essentials of life within those gates. For the Nabateans, engineering was their grand strategy. They built a fortress sustained not by what it kept out, but by what it kept quietly, cleverly within. Control over water must have felt like a sacred gift. In a land where life depended on a sudden flood, the Nabateans didn't see just a resource, they saw a divine force. And they built that relationship into their places of worship. High in the cliffs away from the city, they carved sanctuaries. Some were simple niches. Others were elaborate facades, and in many of them you find this quiet feature. A small, carefully cut channel in the rock. It might run along a wall, directing a trickle toward a carved altar. Or into a shallow basin. This wasn't for drinking, this was an offering, a permanent, engineered connection between the lifeblood of the earth and the realm of the gods. Water was central to their spiritual world. Their chief god, Dashara, was a mountain god, a lord of the stone where their water flowed from. Al-Azza, a powerful goddess, was linked to springs. To vitality, to give water in this landscape was to give the essence of life itself. So in their rituals, water likely played a key role: libations, ceremonial washings. The blessing of a sacred space. These acts would have used the very water their engineering provided. The altar wasn't just a stone table, it was an endpoint of a sacred current, a current they had guided from the storm through the canyon into a hidden pipe, and finally here to be given back. This changes how we see their entire project. The dams, the cisterns, the channels, they weren't merely civic works, they were acts of devotion, a technological prayer. By mastering water, they were participating in a sacred covenant, ensuring the favor of the deities who controlled the rains, the springs. Their engineering was a form of worship, a practical, daily demonstration of their reverence. And their plea for continued survival. It was a dialogue with the divine, written not in words but in stone and in hydraulic plaster. This intertwining of belief and technology reveals a worldview. For the Nabateans, there was no separation between the practical and the spiritual, between manipulating the environment and honoring it. To build a dam was to honor the power of the flood. To store water was to safeguard a divine gift. Their entire civilization was built on this understanding. Their survival wasn't just a triumph of engineering. It was evidence of being in right relationship with the forces that governed their world. The water flowing to the altar was the final proof. It showed their mastery was not about conquest. It was about stewardship, a sacred duty to channel a god's generosity into the heart of their community. The silent flow of water was a promise, but it was a promise that had to be earned. Every single day, that network of channels and tanks didn't maintain itself. For every grand dam, there was a person clearing gravel. For every hidden cistern, someone patching a crack. The genius of Petra wasn't just the initial design. It was the quiet, relentless effort that kept it alive. This was a system that demanded a constant conversation. The desert was always speaking, shifting sand, dropping silt, testing stone, and the people had to listen, they had to respond. After every rain, teams would move through the canyons. Their job was simple, vital, to walk the diversion channels carved into the cliffs, to clear away the debris and sediment the flood left behind. A blocked channel meant water would overflow. It would erode a new path and be lost, so they cleaned. They used simple tools, moving tons of silt and stone by hand. Back-breaking, essential work. The same care went to the underground cisterns. The waterproof plaster lining was a marvel, but it wasn't eternal. It would crack under pressure or wear thin over seasons. Specialized workers would drain the tanks. They'd mix new plaster and reseal the interior. This was a skilled craft, knowing the right mixture, applying it smoothly. A single leak could mean the loss of a community's reserve. This upkeep required more than labor. It required organization. A city of thousands can't leave its water supply to chance. Historians suggest Petra likely had a formal office of water management. A group of engineers and administrators. Their role was to oversee the entire system. They would decide how water was allocated after a flood, which public reservoir filled first, which neighborhood channels received flow, and for how long. They would settle disputes between households over access. They enforced rules about pollution, about wasting the common resource. This bureaucracy was the brain of the system. It turned a collection of brilliant parts into a coherent, functioning whole. The people who did this work, from the planners to the cleaners, they were the unsung heartbeat of Petra. Their daily vigilance turned a one-time engineering triumph into a lasting civilization. It reminds us that sustainability isn't a monument you build and walk away from. It's a practice, an active, ongoing process of care and repair. It relies on shared responsibility, on the transmission of knowledge from one generation of maintainers to the next. The real wonder isn't just that they built a desert oasis, it's that they kept it flowing. Season after season, through collective effort, this hidden labor was the true pact with the desert, a promise to tend the gift so the gift would continue to give. You can see this difference when you look at another famous water system, the Roman aqueducts. The Romans were incredible water engineers. Their approach was grand. It was linear and it was visible. They'd find a stable source, a spring or a mountain lake, often miles from the city, and then they'd build. They built these stone and concrete channels, sometimes on towering arches across valleys. Gravity-fed superhighways for water. They moved a constant, predictable flow over huge distances, to public fountains, to baths, to the homes of the elite. The Roman model was about transportation. It was about conquering distance, bringing the resource to the city, no matter how far. Their engineering imposed a new order on the landscape. The aqueduct was a statement of power, a line drawn across the map. Petra's system worked on a totally different principle. The Nabateans weren't dealing with a stable source miles away. They were dealing with chaos right at their doorstep. Their genius wasn't in transportation over distance. It was in adaptation to intensity. They didn't have a steady spring. They had violent, unpredictable bursts of water, so they didn't build long, elevated channels to bring water in. They built a web, small, clever interventions to slow water down, to spread it out, to convince it to stay. Where the Romans mastered the long pipeline, the Nabateans mastered the local catchment. That's the core distinction. Adaptation versus transportation. The Roman system imposed a solution onto the landscape. It took immense resources, labor, centralized control to build and protect those long, vulnerable lines. Petra's system wove a solution from the landscape itself. It used the natural shape of the canyons as its conduit. It hid its storage in the existing rock. It was decentralized, resilient, intimately tied to the specific rhythms of its place. One method conquered space, the other collaborated with time. The Roman aqueduct is a monument to scale and ambition. Petra's hydraulics are a monument to observation and ingenuity. This doesn't diminish Roman engineering. It just shows that advanced civilization isn't one blueprint. True sophistication is designing a system that fits the problem perfectly. For Rome, the problem was distance. For Petra, the problem was scarcity punctuated by violent surplus. Their solution wasn't less advanced because it was localized. It was brilliant because it was exactly what their context demanded. It proves a civilization's footprint isn't just the monuments it leaves in stone. It's the invisible agreements it makes with its environment. The Romans moved mountains of water. The Nabateans moved mountains of understanding. The story of Petra's water is in the stone. And it's in the dust, the fine layers at the bottom of a cistern that's 2,000 years old. To know how a system worked, when the people who built it didn't leave a manual, you need a different kind of work. A quiet detective work, Paleo-Hydrology, the study of ancient water. It means scientists aren't just looking at what was built, they're reading the story the structure itself tells. They interpret the landscape's memory. The first clue is usually in the plaster. When they find a Nabatean cistern, they don't just measure it, they examine the inside lining very carefully. They look for tool marks, the specific scratches and grooves from the chisels and trowels that applied the waterproof coating. The angle and the pattern of these marks can show the artisan's techniques. Even the sequence of the plaster layers tells a story. Multiple layers mean the cistern was repaired, it was reused, it was cared for across generations. It wasn't a one-time project, it was a maintained asset. Then there's the sediment. Over centuries, fine silt and organic matter settled in these tanks. By taking core samples, scientists read these layers like pages. A thick layer of coarse sand might mean a period of intense flooding, where water rushed in too fast to be filtered. A layer rich in pollen tells them what plants were growing nearby when that sediment was laid down. Olive pollen, grain pollen, that's a snapshot of the local agriculture fed by this water. Beyond the cisterns, the landscape holds data. Archaeologists use ground-penetrating radar. It's a non-invasive technology that sends radio waves into the earth. When those waves hit a buried wall or the empty space of a filled-in channel, they bounce back differently. This lets researchers map the subterranean skeleton of Petra's water network without digging. They can trace the ghostly lines of pipes and conduits under the modern sand. They can find lost reservoirs completely invisible from the surface. This technology turns a scattered collection of ruins into a coherent, city-wide system. You can see how the channels connected, how the flow was managed from the canyon mouth to the distant garden, but maybe the most profound clues come from climate data. Scientists drill cores from nearby lake beds or fossil springs. They analyze the layers of soil and rock for chemical isotopes, for ancient plant spores. This becomes a record of past rainfall. A wet period shows up as one type of sediment. A long drought shows up as another. By matching this climate timeline with the construction phases of Petra's waterworks, a narrative emerges. Did they build more dams during a drier era? Did they expand storage when the rains became more unpredictable? This interdisciplinary puzzle brings the past to life. It's forensic reconstruction. Each scrap of data, from a pollen grain to a radar echo, is a witness. Together, they testify to the sophistication of a society that listened to the desert and wrote its answer in engineered stone. This evolving picture reminds us that history isn't a static fact. It's a conversation. Every new tool, every fresh perspective, lets us listen a little more closely to the whispers left behind. Petra in the 1st century, a capital city, you had this narrow canyon entrance, the Sick. It wasn't quiet, it was a main road, caravans of camels coming through, loaded with frankincense and myrrh. The air would have been full of smells, spices, animals, damp rock, and underneath all that, another sound, a constant murmur, flowing water. That was the city's pulse. Historians think maybe 20,000 people lived there, all of them relying on that water whispering through the stone. It wasn't just a survival trick anymore. It was what made the city work. In the center, the public fountain, the nymphaeum, water cascading over carved stone, a social spot, a display of abundance right there in the desert. Kids playing nearby, travelers washing off dust. That splashing sound was a daily proof. proof the agreement with this harsh place was still good, the network went further. Terracotta pipes under the streets going to wealthy homes, villas with their own little courtyards and gardens, a private trickle of water for that. Which meant a private bath, some fruit trees in a patio that came from the engineered flow, for everyone else neighborhood cisterns filled by the rains. No long trips to a distant well, water was just there, a civic right, then the hills around the city, agricultural terraces, a patchwork of green, olive groves, vineyards, grain. All fed by redirecting floodwater and runoff. The city wasn't just surviving the desert, it was cultivating it. The air in that bowl of cliffs would have smelled like blooming plants, damp earth. A microclimate made by people, the reservoirs were kept full, public ones, hidden ones, a strategic reserve that meant security, not just comfort. A diplomat from Rome or Greece would have been shocked. A full metropolis with Mediterranean amenities but carved from wilderness rock. This was the water system fully operating, the result of generations. Watching the flash floods, testing plaster mixes, grading channels just right, all of it leading to this point of balance, the city in a dynamic balance with its environment. It took the desert's violent, rare gift and stretched it, made it a constant, gentle presence. The first engineers had a vision: command the desert not by fighting it, but by understanding its rhythms. And now that was a living reality. Petra at its height, the ultimate proof. It showed that sustainability isn't a passive state, it's an active partnership. Intelligent, beautiful, a society could build a lasting oasis if it listened to the land and designed its heart around the flow of water. Even the most elegant system has its limits. Petra's water network was a masterpiece of balance, a constant negotiation with a harsh land, and for generations that balance held. But balance isn't a permanent state. It's a condition. It requires everything to stay within certain bounds, and when those bounds are tested, the system begins to hum with a different kind of tension. For Petra, the strain likely arrived not as a single disaster, but as a slow accumulation. Each pressure manageable on its own, perhaps, but together they began to stretch the cities packed with the desert. One quiet threat came from the city's own success: a growing population. More people meant more demand on that finite, stored water, more homes needing cisterns, more mouths to feed from the terraced gardens. The system was designed for a certain scale. Exceeding that scale meant thinner margins. A few dry years in a row would have emptied reserves faster, with less time to recover. The engineers could manage water, but they could not command the clouds. Then there were the changes they made to the land. To build Petra, they needed wood. For scaffolding, for roofs, for heating. This likely meant clearing the forests upstream, the very hills that caught their rain. Deforestation has a silent consequence. Trees hold soil in place. They slow the runoff, let water seep into the ground. Without that sponge, the rain rushed off the bare slopes faster. The flash floods their dams were built for would have become more violent, carrying heavier loads of silt. That meant constant, heavier maintenance, clearing channels more often, repairing dams battered by stronger forces. The labor to keep the system pristine would have grown. Trade was another variable, the source of Petra's wealth. If the incense routes shifted or political power moved, the city's economic engine would have slowed. Maintaining that hidden network required a specialized workforce, significant resources. A decline in revenue could have meant less funding for upkeep. A few cracked cisterns left unrepaired, a channel slowly clogging. The system's resilience depended on vigilance, and vigilance depends on a stable society able to prioritize it. Natural events could also apply pressure. A major earthquake, not uncommon there, could have fractured bedrock, misaligning the precise gradients of their channels. Collapsing key reservoirs, a series of severe, multi-year droughts would have lowered the water table, delivered less rain to capture. The system was designed for scarcity, but there is a threshold. When the input falls too low for too long, even perfect storage runs dry. These pressures, environmental, economic, social, likely compounded over decades. The strain wouldn't have been a dramatic collapse, but a gradual tightening, a sense that the old rhythms were slipping, that the agreements with the desert were becoming harder to keep. The genius of Petra's system was its deep integration with a specific, understood environment. But when that environment changed, whether by human hands or natural cycles, the very precision of that integration could become a vulnerability. No human creation, however brilliant, exists in a vacuum. It's part of a larger, living system, and that system is always in motion. In the year 106, the Romans took over Nabatea. Petra was now part of their empire. A new flag was raised, but the old problem was still there. The desert, the flash floods, the city still needed water. The Romans arrived. They saw a city that worked right in the middle of the desert. They saw the channels, the cisterns. They didn't think to tear it down. They thought it was brilliant. They decided to use it and to make it more Roman. The Romans were known for scale, for aqueducts, but here, building a long aqueduct would have been very difficult. And it wasn't really needed. The Nabatean system was already solving the problem, so the Romans expanded it, they upgraded it. You can see it in the materials. The Nabateans used terracotta pipes, stone channels. The Romans used concrete, they used lead. They probably put in new, more durable pipes in certain sections. They might have reinforced dams. They likely made the big reservoirs even bigger for a growing population. But the biggest change was in how the water was used. The Romans loved public baths. A bathhouse was central to their life. In Petra, they built one, a Roman bath complex. That meant the water network had to deliver a steady, large supply to this new building. The Nabatean system was now feeding a Roman ritual. Then, centuries later, things changed again. The Roman Empire faded. The Byzantine era began. Christianity was the main faith. The city got smaller, more monastic, but the water kept flowing. They didn't need grand baths anymore, but they needed to survive. They kept using the old cisterns. They kept cleaning the channels, they adapted them. You find evidence in the repurposing. A large Nabatean tomb up on a cliff becomes a Byzantine church. And right next to it, a cistern. The same water storage that served a king or a merchant now served monks. They repaired the plaster, they kept it working. The system was agnostic. It didn't care about the god being prayed to. It was a tool for life. It remained vital. That's the real testament to the Nabatean design. It wasn't fragile, it was a platform. It served a trading capital, then a Roman city, then a Christian community. Each new group inherited it, they each maintained it. They tweaked it, but the core principles stayed. For over 500 years after the Nabateans were gone, their engineering gave life to that place. That's more than good building. It was a system woven into the logic of the land. It became indispensable. It outlasted empires. It outlasted religions. The water remembered its path long after the names of the kings were forgotten. The sound of water in Petra was a promise that lasted for centuries. But promises can be forgotten. The system's decline wasn't one event. It was a slow unraveling. Over generations, the great trade routes shifted. New sea routes made the caravans less essential. The city's economic power faded, and with that, a slow draining of resources. The engineers, the administrators who managed the water, their knowledge was a living tradition. As the population shrank, as priorities changed, that tradition became harder to sustain. The work of clearing silt after every rain, of resealing cisterns, it required a community invested in its own future. When that future grew uncertain, the maintenance became sporadic. A channel would clog, a cistern would crack and be left empty. The system began to fragment. Natural forces played a part. The region is seismically active. A significant earthquake could have fractured the bedrock. It could have misaligned the precise gradients of key aqueducts, collapsed a crucial reservoir, sent a cascade of failure through the network. Even without a quake, the flash floods continued. Each storm deposited more silt. Without teams to clear it, the channels would fill. The water would find new destructive paths, eroding the very stone meant to guide it. The desert began to reclaim its authority. Patiently filling the conduits with dust and gravel, the knowledge itself began to fade, the understanding of how to mix the perfect hydraulic plaster. The memory of which hidden valve controlled which neighborhoods flow. These weren't written in books, they were held in the hands and minds of the maintainers. As generations passed, that practical wisdom slipped away. What was once a city-wide symphony became a collection of isolated, functioning parts. Then, one by one, those parts fell silent. Centuries passed, Petra wasn't entirely empty. Local Bedouin communities made homes in the great tombs. They found uses for the ancient works. A cracked cistern, if it still held water after a rain, became a vital resource. They used what they could, but the grand design, the interconnected web, was lost to them. It was simply part of the landscape, a relic of a people they called the ancients. The genius of the system became invisible, buried under time and sand. Then, in 1812, a man arrived. He called himself Sheikh Ibrahim ibn Abdallah. A scholar on a pilgrimage, his real name was Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer. He'd heard rumors of a lost city carved into red cliffs south of the Dead Sea. With caution and respect, he persuaded a guide to take him there. What he saw, emerging from the sick, beholding the treasury facade in the sun, left him awestruck. He wrote meticulous notes. He saw the grandeur, but he also saw the silence. He noted the Bedouin living there, drawing water from old cisterns. Yet the full scale of the water system, the hundreds of channels and tanks, remained hidden. Even to this trained observer, it was a city of monuments, not yet a city of engineering. That's the poignant layer. The moment of rediscovery was also a moment of partial understanding. Burckhardt saw the magnificent effect, but not the intricate cause. The technological mastery that sustained a civilization for nearly 1,000 years was so woven into the place it had become scenery. It highlights a truth about human knowledge. Even the most advanced systems are fragile. They depend not just on stone and plaster, but on continuous care. On shared purpose, on the active transmission of understanding from one generation to the next. When those social bonds loosen, the stone alone cannot hold the memory. The water forgets its path, and the desert whispers only of what is missing. Burckhardt found the door, but the full story that took another 100 years to really come out. Everyone saw the facades at Petra, the tombs, the temples, but the real genius of the place, it was hidden. It was in the water system, that network of channels and cisterns. That was the key to understanding how the city actually worked. And to figure that out, you needed a different kind of exploration. You had to look past the monuments. You had to get into the dust, into the conduits. So the systematic work, the real archaeology, it started in the 20th century. Teams came from all over. Not just to look at the buildings, they came to excavate, to map, to measure. It was slow work, meticulous. They'd climb cliffs to find a cistern opening. They'd clear out tons of silt from a diversion channel, and underneath they'd find the stonework, precise. Each section they cleared was another piece. A piece of a huge hydraulic puzzle. They started documenting connections, not just a tank by itself, but how a channel from the sick would feed a reservoir, and how that reservoir would supply a neighborhood. They were tracing the veins of the city. A key person in all this is Dr. Charles R. Ortloff. He was an engineer. So he looked at Petra's waterworks not just as ruins, but as a system, a functioning system. In the 80s and 90s, he and his team used computer models. Early ones, they'd put in the measurements, the width of a channel, its gradient, its shape, and the simulation would show the flow, how fast the water moved. how much it could carry, where the pressure points were, and this digital testing, it confirmed the precision, that 1% slope in the sick channel. That wasn't an accident, it was a design calculated to get a steady flow, one that wouldn't erode the stone. The models proved their system was optimized. Efficient, built specifically for flash floods. So late 20th century technology was finally decoding the engineering from the 1st century. But one of the best moments in all this, it isn't in a report. It's in an act of revival. After years of digging, archaeologists and local workers would finally clear a long section of a main channel. They'd remove the earth and the rocks that had been blocking it for 1,000 years. Then they'd wait for rain, or sometimes to test it, they'd bring in water at the top. The whole team would stand there, watching quietly, and the water would start its journey down that stone course. For the first time in over a millennium, water would flow where the Nabateans meant it to flow. It's a profound thing, a reconnection. That sound of water moving after all that silence, it's like a conversation. With the past, it validates everything, every measurement, every theory. It brings the ruins back to life just for a minute, and this work, it's hard work. Physical, under the desert sun, clearing debris block by block, documenting everything with photos and drawings, trying to piece the engineering logic back together from fragments. It's a dialogue with the past, an attempt to really see the scale of what they built. Every channel cleared, every cistern mapped, it adds to it the awe. You start to see that the famous tombs, they were just the surface. The real monument was the invisible network, the one that sustained life, that made all the grandeur possible. So this modern work, it does more than uncover history. It teaches you something about resilience, about observing nature, about designing for the long term. The archaeologists and engineers today, they're not just studying the Nabateans, they're learning from them. That 1% slope in the sick wasn't an accident. It came from a real understanding of water. Water is demanding. If you move it too fast, it becomes destructive. It'll scour the channel away. Move it too slow and it stagnates. Algae grows, sediment settles and clogs everything. The Nabateans found a middle ground. Their target was a very shallow slope, about 0.5%. So for every 100 meters the channel ran, it only dropped 0.5 meter. It looks almost flat, but it was calculated. That gentle decline gave just enough pull to keep the water moving. A constant, gentle flow, fast enough to carry away silt and stop things from growing, but slow enough that it wouldn't gain the power to erode the sandstone. It was a balance, cleanliness and preservation, to keep that consistency over kilometers along a naturally uneven canyon wall. That's where the skill is. They didn't have laser levels. Their main tool was probably a corobate, a simple instrument, a long wooden beam, maybe 6 meters long, with a trough carved along the top. You'd fill the trough with water. Water finds its level. By sighting along the water's surface, an engineer could establish a perfectly level line. To make a slope, they'd use wooden wedges to tilt one end of the corobate by the exact amount. 0.5%, then with plumb bobs and sighting rods, they'd transfer that angle to the cliff. They'd mark where to carve. Teams of stonecutters followed these marks. They chiseled the channel to that grade, section by section, maintaining that gradient around bends and over rises in the bedrock. It was a monumental task of precision. And patience. This wasn't theoretical. It was applied wisdom from generations of watching water. They knew from experience what slope worked. They turned that knowledge into a standard. And they built it with tools that turned observation into geometry. Their system is a testament to a different kind of science, not from abstract formulas. From a repeated dialogue with a natural force, they solved a fluid dynamics problem with craftsmanship and a commitment to the details. The silent, enduring flow through Petra was the proof. The treasury at Petra, that carved facade, it's for the dead, but it also speaks of water. You can see the traces. Up high, below the urn, there are these small, square openings. And at the base, channels cut right into the rock floor. They were deliberate conduits. That's the fourth principle. Water wasn't just buried. It was a design element woven into their sacred architecture. Those channels at the treasury, they likely had a ceremonial purpose. Picture a ritual here, water drawn from the city's network, brought to this cliff. It might have cascaded down the facade in a thin, glittering sheet, or filled a basin at the tomb's entrance for purification. The effect would have been stunning. In all that dry, red rock, a veil of moving water, it transformed the monument. It wasn't just a static carving. It became a living part of the landscape, animated by the same resource that sustained the city. Water was a spiritual connector, linking the ancestors with the vitality of the present. This integration was everywhere. The great temple complex had an elaborate system. A large cistern under its courtyard, channels along the sides of its grand staircase. Water would have been present during gatherings, its sound, its coolness adding to the solemnity. Even the simple, hidden tombs in the cliffs, they often have a small cistern nearby, or a channel to direct runoff away from the entrance. The architects and the hydraulic engineers, they were clearly the same people. Or they worked in perfect concert. You didn't build a grand structure and then figure out the water. The water plan came first. It dictated the placement. The orientation, the very foundation. A building's location was chosen with drainage in mind. A tomb carved too low in a wadi bed would be ruined by the first flash flood. So they built high, but they also built cleverly. They carved gutters and spillways into the cliff faces above their monuments to divert rainwater away from the delicate facades. They designed the rock-cut streets with a gentle camber, so runoff would flow into central drains, keeping the public spaces passable. The city itself was a catchment surface. Every slope, every wall, part of the water management scheme. This reveals a profound cultural value. For the Nabateans, functionality and beauty were not separate goals. The system's elegance was its aesthetic. The sight and sound of water in a ceremonial space, it enhanced the grandeur. The political symbolism, a ruler who could command water to flow in the desert, even to adorn the tombs of the past, was demonstrating a divine-like authority over nature. The engineering was the art. The lifeblood of the city was also its most powerful decorative feature. It made the invisible vital, visible. It turned survival into spectacle. And infrastructure into identity. This seamless blend, it asks us to look beyond the stone, to listen for the echo of the water that once made it sing. The silent channels of Petra still speak, if you know how to listen. For the Bedouin who have lived in this landscape for centuries, water isn't just history. It's a living practice, a dialogue with the same desert. Their knowledge forms a bridge across time. It's an enduring wisdom shaped by this specific place. They see water not as a public utility, but as a hidden treasure, a secret the land holds. One of their key concepts is the gale, a hidden spring, a seep. Often at the base of a cliff or in a secluded canyon, finding a gale requires a deep literacy, reading the subtle signs, the specific vegetation that clusters in one spot, hinting at moisture below. The color and texture of the rock suggesting a fracture, the way certain birds behave. This knowledge is passed down orally, from elder to child, through stories and shared experience. It's a map written in collective memory. The Nabateans engineered grand systems to capture floodwater, but they too would have relied on this intimate understanding. To find the initial water sources, the earliest settlements, the principle is the same. You don't fight the desert's scarcity, you learn its hidden language. Its hidden generosity. Their agricultural methods echo an ancient logic. In the highlands around Petra, you see small stone terraces, much like the ancient ones but more modest. a household scale, a family builds a low wall across a gentle slope to catch the sparse runoff from a rare rain. Behind that wall, soil accumulates. They plant a few olive trees, some barley, a vegetable patch. This is micro-farming. It doesn't aim to feed a city. It aims to provide for a family. It works with the same principle the Nabateans used. Slow the water down, let it sink in, make a small pocket of fertility, right where the water wants to gather. The technology is simple, elemental. Its effectiveness comes from perfect adaptation. To the rhythm of the land, it represents the same core idea. Capture whatever moisture you can, right where it falls, store it in the ground itself, conserve it for the roots. This isn't a direct, unbroken line. From Nabatean engineer to modern Bedouin farmer, empires rose and fell, knowledge was lost and rediscovered in different forms. What connects them isn't a specific blueprint, it's a shared mindset, a resilient, adaptive intelligence born from a long conversation with a dry land. Both civilizations, separated by centuries, arrived at similar solutions because the environment presented the same fundamental problems. How do you live here? The answers are capture, store, conserve. They're timeless. They transcend any one culture, any one technology. The Bedouin practices honor this enduring relationship. They remind us that true sustainability is often local, practical, woven into daily life. It's less about monumental construction, more about attentive care. The legacy of Petra's water mastery isn't locked in the ruined cisterns. It lives on in the quiet recognition of a greener patch of shrubs, in the careful placement of a terraced stone. It's a legacy of listening, and in that listening there's a hope that the most vital knowledge, how to live in balance with our world, can be remembered. Even when the monuments themselves have fallen silent, the desert that shaped Petra is still here. It presses on our world now. Water scarcity isn't something coming later. It's already here for billions of people. The Nabateans faced this with the tools they had, and what they did about it, it matters now more than you'd think. Petra is a case study. It shows you can meet scarcity with design, not just force. Capture, store, conserve. Those are their principles, and they're the same ones guiding water strategies today. Take modern Jordan, the country that holds Petra's ruins. It's one of the most water-scarce places on Earth, so engineers and communities are looking back. They're reviving old rainwater harvesting. On farms in the highlands, you see new versions of stone terraces. They slow the runoff, let it sink into the ground. In cities, new buildings have rooftop catchments, channeling rain into cisterns underground, just like the tanks carved under Petra's courtyards. This isn't about nostalgia. It's adaptation, using low-tech methods that fit the climate. And this is happening in other places. In the American Southwest, Arizona, arid land managers are looking at ancient practices. They build green infrastructure that mimics nature. Instead of rushing stormwater away in channels, they make basins, depressions, letting rainwater sink into the earth. Restoring natural floodplains, the goal is the Nabatean goal. Slow the water down, let the land absorb it, recharge the aquifers naturally. That approach recognizes something. The most resilient water system is often decentralized, a network of many small interventions, like Petra's web of cisterns, not one big, vulnerable project. Climate change makes that logic critical. Our rainfall is becoming more unpredictable, long dry spells, then intense deluges, more like Petra's climate. The old model, massive dams, long aqueducts, it's impressive, but it can be fragile. It's a centralized bet on a stable climate. Petra's model is different. It builds resilience through distribution. If one cistern fails, 100 others work. If a channel clogs, you redirect, a buffer against uncertainty. The lesson is simple. True sustainability means working with local conditions, not against them. The Nabateans didn't try to import a Mediterranean water system to the desert. They observed the desert's own hydrology, the rhythm of feast and famine, and they designed a system that turned that rhythm into a resource. Their technology was appropriate. Local materials, stone, plaster, pottery, deep local knowledge, the opposite of a one-size-fits-all solution dropped onto a landscape. For us, the parallel is clear. Solutions to our water crises won't come from one magical invention. They'll come from a mosaic of strategies, localized, context-sensitive, rainwater harvesting in cities, regenerative agriculture that helps soil hold water, restoring wetlands that act as natural sponges. Petra teaches that the intelligence is in the landscape itself. Our task is the same as theirs: to observe carefully, to understand the natural systems, and to integrate our needs with theirs. The genius of Petra wasn't conquering the desert. It was starting a conversation with it, a conversation we need to resume. The romantic idea of a lost city is powerful, a place swallowed by time. We hear the name, the lost city of Petra, and we imagine something hidden, untouched, just waiting for a European explorer to find it, to bring it back to the world. That story is compelling, but it's incomplete. It covers over a much longer history. The truth is, Petra was never truly lost, not to the people who lived there. For centuries, local Bedouin tribes made their homes in those carved cliffs. They knew every tomb, every canyon. They used the old cisterns to collect rainwater for their animals. They had names for the places, the treasury, Al-Khosneh. They knew that. The city was part of their landscape. It was part of their livelihood. It wasn't a secret kept from humanity. It was a home. What was lost was the global memory. The memory of its significance, the scale of what was built there, the story of the civilization that made it. So Burckhardt's visit wasn't a discovery in an empty land. It was a reintroduction, a reconnection of that local knowledge with a wider story. Correcting this myth isn't about taking away wonder, it's about redirecting it. The awe shouldn't be for a city preserved in a vacuum. It should be for a place so well built, so integrated into the land, that it stayed useful long after its builders were gone. That leads to another common idea, that their water system was a mysterious secret, a kind of magic trick. The reality is far more impressive. There was no magic. No divine intervention just for them. What they had was a profound, patient science of observation. They didn't command water because they had a secret scroll. They commanded it because they spent generations watching where it flowed, timing the floods, testing plaster mixes, learning from failures. Their engineering was applied physics. Applied geology. They understood gradient. They understood water pressure and sedimentation. They knew which sandstone layers were porous and which could hold a seal. This was technology, not mysticism. To call it a mysterious secret diminishes their intellect. It turns their hard-won mastery into a fluke. When we see it as science, it becomes something we can understand, something we can even learn from. It becomes a human achievement with a logic we can access. We can look at that 1% slope in the sick and recognize the calculation. We can study the plaster and reverse engineer the recipe. Their genius is replicable, and that makes it more powerful, not less. Dispelling these myths does something important. It grounds the story. It brings the Nabateans out of legend and into the world of people. People who faced a brutal environment. People who used their minds and their hands and their collective will to not just survive but to thrive. They made a covenant with a desert, and they kept it through intelligence, through maintenance. That's a relatable story. It's a story about resilience, about community, about paying attention to the world around you. When we strip away the exoticism, what's left is even more inspiring. A blueprint for sustainable living, written in stone and water. A testament to what humans can do when they work with their environment, not against it. This grounded perspective doesn't rob Petra of its magic. It reveals the true source. The magic was in their unwavering attention, in their refusal to see the desert as an enemy. they saw it as a partner, and in that partnership, they built something that whispers to us across 2,000 years. Not with the voice of a lost fantasy, but with the clear, practical voice of human ingenuity. We can see the water flow now. Modern technology gives us a different window into Petra's past. Not just digging, a digital reconstruction. Archaeologists and computer modelers are using 3D scanning and simulation software to rebuild the whole hydraulic system as it worked. They begin with laser scans, every channel, every cistern opening, every piece of a dam. Millions of data points become a virtual map, a stone skeleton. Then they animate it. You click a button and simulate a storm over the high plateau. Blue digital water gathers across the landscape. It funnels into the main wadis. It hits the Great Diversion Dam at the mouth of the Sick, and you see part of that torrent get lifted, shunted away through the bypass tunnel, just like the Nabateans designed. The rest enters the Sick, flowing at a controlled, steady pace down that channel hidden in the wall. The simulation shows it branching. Some water fills the large public reservoirs. Some travels through underground pipes to neighborhood tanks. Some goes to the city center, feeding the fountains. You watch the cisterns fill in real time. Their levels rising. You see the water travel out to the agricultural terraces. This digital model turns a static, ruined network into a living system. For researchers, it's a testing tool. They can adjust variables. What if the annual rainfall was only half? The model shows how long the reserves would last. What if a key channel was blocked by an earthquake? The simulation reveals where backups would happen, where floods would occur. It lets them test theories about flow rates and capacity with a precision the physical ruins alone can't give. For everyone else, it's an immersive education. It translates 2,000-year-old engineering into a visual story. You don't just hear about a 1% slope. You see the water moving because of it. You understand why that angle was crucial. This virtual Petra is a fusion of ancient and modern intellect. The Nabateans used their understanding of physics and landscape to build a real-world system. We use our understanding of computing and data to recreate it in a virtual space. Both are acts of observation. Both try to command complexity through design. The digital model does more than educate. It reanimates. It gives voice back to the silent stones and the dry channels. For a moment, you're not looking at a dead city. You're witnessing a civilization's heartbeat, the pulse of water that made the grandeur possible. It closes a loop, lets us finally see the invisible genius that was always there. Waiting to be seen, that digital pulse of water is a memory, a reconstruction. The Petra you walk through now is caught between two worlds. It's an UNESCO site, a monument. And it's a living landscape with a modern town and hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. That creates a new balancing act, one the ancient engineers never considered. Celebrating their achievement now tests the resilience of the place they built. The town is Wadi Musa. It sits right at the gates. It's grown for tourism. The needs are immense. Thousands of hotel rooms need water, showers, kitchens, restaurants, shops, all the people. They place a demand on the same arid environment. The local aquifer is under pressure. Modern wells pump for today's needs. It's a separate system from the ancient one, but it's drawing from the same limited water. That's the irony. The city that mastered desert hydrology faces a modern water challenge, not from a lack of engineering, from the scale of its own legacy's appeal. Inside the site, preservation is a daily task. The greatest threat to the ancient water structures isn't neglect, it's attention. The footfall of millions compacts the soil along the Sick. It wears away the stone paving, and under that, the hidden channels still run. That changes the ground. It alters the drainage patterns, the patterns the Nabateans calculated. Conservation teams monitor the erosion. They install walkways, viewing platforms to guide the flow of people, to protect what's underneath, and then there are the flash floods. The same force the Nabateans harnessed. Their system has been silent for centuries, channels clogged, dams ruined. So when a major storm hits now, the water behaves like it did before them. It follows the path of least resistance. It rushes down the sick, a torrent that can damage the lower tombs, that can threaten visitors. The modern response echoes the ancient one. But with different tools, Jordanian authorities, international experts, they've installed new diversion barriers, drainage culverts. They're resuming the conversation with the desert. Using contemporary engineering to protect the ancient stone from the very water that once gave it life. This work shows a truth. Petra isn't a frozen moment. Its story continues. Preserving the past here is an active process. It means managing the pressures of the present, the needs of a community, the impact of global admiration. It requires the same foresight the Nabateans had. It means ensuring that legacy, that testament to balance, endures, not as a static ruin, as a living lesson. That the most sustainable systems are the ones cared for, adapted, respected across generations. The pact with the desert has to be renewed again and again. Even with all our models and excavations, some things about Petra's water system are still unknown. The full picture isn't complete. There are gaps in the record, places where the story just stops. And that's not a failure, it's just how history works. It leaves room to keep looking. One of the big practical questions is about scale. We can measure a single cistern. We can map a channel, but what was the total capacity of the whole network? How many months of security did it actually give the city? There are estimates, but they are guesses. The system was so decentralized with so many private tanks. A definitive number, it's elusive. It's a puzzle of volume, and the answer would tell us exactly how long Petra could last under a siege or through a long drought. It would put their resilience into real numbers, gallons, days. Then there's the question of law. Water, there was the ultimate commodity, so how was it governed? What did the legal system look like? Were there tablets now lost that laid out water rights? Did you pay a tax based on your cistern size? If a neighbor blocked your channel, how was that settled? We see the physical system, but the social system, the legal architecture, that's much harder to see. The channels are silent. They don't tell us who decided when to open a gate or who was first in line after a scarce rain. We talk about their successes, the dams that lasted centuries, but what about their failures? Engineering is trial and error. Were there projects that collapsed? A reservoir built in the wrong place that never filled, a tunnel that flooded. Those lessons written in ruin would be valuable. They'd show us the limits of their knowledge. The problems they couldn't solve. Finding a failure might teach us as much as finding a perfect design. And maybe the most evocative mystery is about ritual. We see channels carved into sacred spaces like the treasury. Water had spiritual meaning. But what did the ceremonies actually look like? Was there a specific time of year after the first flood when water was brought to the tombs? Were there chants, processions? Offerings when a new channel first flowed, the sound of water in a silent temple. What did that mean to the people who heard it? That fusion of faith and flow, those are the most fragile parts of the past. They leave the faintest trace. These unanswered questions, they're not a weakness in the story. They're its lifeblood. They remind us that history isn't a closed book. It's a conversation. Every new dig, every new sensor might turn one of these mysteries into a revelation. They keep the story dynamic and they hum with an invitation. The desert still holds secrets. The conversation between the stone and the rain isn't over. We're still learning how to listen. Petra's story is really a conversation. A long one between people and a difficult place. They built diversion dams in the sick. They carved cisterns into the cliffs. It was a response, an answer to a hard environmental problem. The principles are simple when you look at them. Catch the rare floodwater, store it carefully, move it precisely, and keep it hidden. But what came from that wasn't simple at all. It was the base for a civilization, one that didn't just survive the desert, it danced with it. They made scarcity into security, a wasteland into a wonder. And that change reflects our own time back at us. Water, this basic thing, is becoming a crisis for many. Our solutions tend to be big, centralized. They use a lot of energy. We build longer pipelines from further away. We drill deeper wells. Petra suggests something else. It whispers that resilience might be in a network. Smaller, smarter moves, systems that work with local rhythms, not against them, where conservation is valued as much as consumption. Their genius was in the desert. They didn't see an enemy to beat, they saw a partner with its own logic, and they learned that logic, they respected it, they used it. Those silent, rose-red stones are more than a monument. They're a testament to a kind of intelligence, one we need to remember now, an intelligence of observation, of adaptation, of stewardship over the long term. It asks us to look at our own landscapes, our own challenges, to think not just about what we can take, but how we can collaborate, how we can listen. Petra's legacy isn't locked in the past, it flows forward, a lesson in sustainability, urging us to build with that same creative foresight.